All right. Well, I'm going to get started while we allow everyone to kind of trickle in. But thank you for everyone that's here now. This is the Exit Advisors Town Hall series. And today we've got Heidi Weelborg of Ball Weelborg Attorneys. We've had Heidi on before, along with her partner, Aaron. Good friends, good business advisors, legal advisors that we've worked with. So happy to have you again, Heidi. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Quick overview. For those that are not familiar with Exit Advisors, we are a boutique M&A advisory firm based out of Houston. And we, these types of events that are education based, we really pride ourselves on helping educate entrepreneurs and business owners about the exit process and developing an exit strategy, going into your succession planning, which is hyper relevant for today's discussion because Heidi focuses on the kind of estate planning side of things. So it's not just what you do, while you're building your business and preparing to sell your business, but it's a lot, how do you safeguard your nest egg once you do sell? And Heidi is a perfect example of someone who can help walk you through that. So, we've got a very tailored process that we adapt to each business. And let me see. And I can walk you through our plan, but ultimately we start with education, we get you through execution, and we want to connect you to the right trusted advisors like Heidi. So we encourage you to reach out to us if you have specific questions. Reach out to folks like Heidi, who can really make sure that you're safeguarding and doing things as accurately and correctly as possible. So Heidi, I'll turn it over to you now. We're looking forward to hearing what you have to say and jumping right in.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. Glad to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to talk about estate tax law changes with the new administration. And interestingly enough, Biden released a few more things regarding his tax plans for this year, and state tax was not on that list this morning, but some of the other things I was going to talk about that kind of intertwine with state taxes are, so that'll be included a little bit later. But first of all, I'm just going to kind of cover what are estate taxes, why do we have them, what do they do? So they're different from your income tax, right? They aren't taxed on money that you make. They're taxed on the value of property that you have at your death, and that's transferred to your heirs or whomever it is that you are going to give your property to. And what I find a little interesting and probably maybe a little geeky is the estate tax history. So it actually started as funding for wars back in actually all the way back to 1798. Our country used to have special taxes that they would use to fund wars. And then when the war was over, the tax would end and people were happy to pay it because it was needed, for the troops and whatever to support. And then in 1916, we kept it. So we used it for World War I, and then we kept it. And it kind of turned into something different. Instead of funding for a war and then ending like our previous taxes, it became more of a redistribution tool. In fact, in 1932, there was a revenue act that referred to it as the redistribution of large private fortunes. So that's kind of interesting that that's where it started. And then estate tax was never a permanent part of our tax system up until very recently, which was in 2012, oddly enough. So we've had an estate tax every year. It's gone up and down. The percentage that is taxable has gone up and down. The amount that's exempted has gone up and down. And it's really gone all over the place. And a lot of it is political depending on if it's more conservative government or more progressive. And so we've always had an estate tax except for 1 year, 2010. And I don't know how many of you were doing tax maybe on the exit advisors here. You remember this, where there was no estate tax that year. So there was one man who died. He was a billionaire, and his entire estate was passed through tax-free. So quickly after that, when George W. Bush was president, then in 2012, it became a permanent part of our tax code. So now it's a permanent part of our tax code. And we've had it, like I said, pretty much on and off, but now it's a little bit different. We've got also intertwined in the estate tax is gift tax. So gift tax is done while you're alive. If you are wanting to give a gift, it also goes against your estate tax exemption amount when you pass away. It's all kind of rolled into one ball. There's one amount that's an exemption that you get when you die, and it all gets added together at that time. The only thing that's not is if you gift below this annual exclusion gifting amount is $15,000 per person. So you could give $15,000 to 10 of your best friends, as long as they don't get more than $15,000. It's not part of that. But anything you gift over that is part of that gift and estate tax that we have. So that's just a little overview on how it works and kind of the background. So this year we have an extremely high, the highest amount we've ever had that we can gift estate tax free. And that is $11.7 million per person, or $23.4 million per married couple. So part of that is something that was also instituted back in 2011, which is portability. And what portability is it allows for when the first spouse dies, if you don't use your whole $11.7 million, you can transfer whatever's left to your spouse. So you just have to make sure you file the appropriate tax returns to claim that. And then you've got whatever they had at their death, whatever's left over, and then when you pass away. So if two people passed away this year, they would have the 23.4 million. But you know, if you passed away 5 years from now, we don't know what that exemption amount is going to be. So you would be able to save, kind of like book the amount from this year, but then we don't know what the next years are going to bring. So right now, the current estate tax rate for anything over that exemption amount, that 11.7 million, is 40%. So it doesn't kick in until over that amount, and it only is taxed on amounts after that 11.7 million. So it also is kind of a complicated tax return because there's some little formulas in there, but you want to be able to go visit someone like exit advisors, somebody that's got good tax background that can figure that out for you when the time comes. The other thing is, so our rate that we have now is adjusted for inflation. It started out in 2012 or 2011 at $5 million per person. And then in 2017, we had the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And that really upped the amount and upped it to 10,000 or 10 million, sorry, per person. And at that time, it was also adjusting for inflation. And so in 2025, we will see that drop back down to that $5 million adjusted for inflation. And so you can kind of see, I'm going to go to this chart that lays that out a little bit for you. It's got a bunch of numbers on it, I know, for back to 2007, but you can see, if you look at the 2011, that's when the new like permanent tax laws started to the 5 million, and then we started adjusting for inflation. So you can see it kind of like adds up a little bit per year. And then in 2018, when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act kicked in, we bumped it up for the 10 million, but then it also already adjusted for inflation. And so when it drops back in 2025, that's provided if nothing happens between now and then. It will be probably closer to 6 million per person, but I guess we won't know that for sure until 2025. But the 40% rate is set, and that's not supposed to go up. And then you can see all the way on the right, the annual gift exclusion has gone up. It's still set at 15,000 per year, and that's set by the Treasury Department every year. So we're still in that $15,000. And if you remember, that's the one that you can pass estate tax free. You don't have to file a gift tax return. You can just pass that on to whoever it is that you want to give that to. And that can be a really good estate planning tool, because what it can do is it can help you reduce your amount that you have in your estate, if that's what you're trying to do, to try and stay under the exemption. And you don't have to use your gift tax amount at the same time. So if you're a married couple, you can actually do $30,000 as a married couple, because you each get $15,000. And if you had 4 kids, then you can do $120,000, because you can do $30,000 to each kid. You could even do it to give it to their spouse, your grandchildren. The list could go on. So there's a lot of things you could do. That's a very good tool to use if you're looking at needing to reduce your estate. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, geez, I don't have $11.7 million. My spouse and I, we don't have $23.4 million. We don't need to do that. But we are looking at what is going to happen in the next few years, and your estate may become taxable. So it's something to start thinking about with that type of gifting, because it's, like I said, a very good plan, and it's easy to do because you don't have to file any tax returns, and you can give it to whomever you want to, and every year, however often you want to as well. So right now, I know this chart only goes to 2018, so I have this other little one here that it kind of shows you too how just recently, 1999, we could only pass $650,000 per person estate tax free, and now we're up to this 11.7 million. So it's interesting to look at the difference in just barely 20 years that the estate exemption amount has jumped so much. And again, that's kind of a reflection of, who's been in office when these bills have passed. And a lot of the more conservative belief is we should get rid of the estate tax. It actually only funds about, it's less than 1% of the federal budget. So it's not the largest amount in the world and do we need it? There's been questions on that. Less than 0.1% of all estates last year were taxed for the estate tax. So the amount has just kind of gone down and down and down. And I wouldn't say we really rely on it for a lot of funding, but we just had a lot of money go out the door for COVID, all these packages. So, and Biden is going to lower the exemption amount. So we tend to want to believe that probably is going to happen, since he's been releasing all of his other estate tax propositions that he started back when he was campaigning. And I think they're just kind of slowly rolling out. We just haven't seen the estate tax one come out yet. It's probably going to be later in the year. But, he just released today some stuff, and it ties into the estate taxes as well. And we'll look at that, like I said, in a little bit. But I wanted to also point out on this chart, so you can see the difference between, 2026, we're dropping back down to that 5 million, plus it'll be inflation. That's not shown on here. The inflation isn't. But the other thing is that doesn't show on here, but in 2010, there really wasn't an estate tax. That was like an alternate tax, I think, that they have listed there. But that's also when portability came out. And so if you have an estate plan or if you know someone that has an estate plan and it's pre-2010, they really need to get that updated and looked at, because what I'm running into is I'm actually seeing plans that have been done in the 90s that are coming through, and they don't plan for that portability. And so it really kind of messes up what happens when the first spouse dies, because they've got these more stringent rules because you're trying to save everything that person could do at that time when they died. So those plans really need to be updated. And if you, like I said, if you have that, or if you know someone that does, you should really talk to an estate planning attorney or whoever you use and get that plan up to date. Kind of the rule of thumb is every 3 to 5 years, your estate plan should be updated. And as you can see from this chart, every few years, it's changed quite a bit. So, and it'll be changing again, like we're thinking here later this year. So really is a good time to go in and get that looked at. And if you don't have an estate plan, you should get one. So, because everybody is going to, at some point, unfortunately, we all are going to need one. And so you want to have that done for your family. Now, one other thing I wanted to mention that a lot of people don't think about is states that have estate tax or inheritance taxes. So Texas doesn't have one. We got rid of ours in 2015, and a lot of states kind of been getting rid of theirs since the last few years, mainly kind of been a trend. But you can see on this chart that there are still states that have it. The pink ones are estate taxes, and then the purple are inheritance taxes, and there's a difference. So basically an estate tax is like what we've been talking about. If you pass away, your estate will pay the taxes before it passes out any assets to whoever the heirs are. And so your estate is responsible for paying and filing and doing all of those tax returns. The difference with inheritance tax is the recipient actually pays the tax. So if you have family, let's say in Pennsylvania, and you're going to inherit some land from them, you will have to pay an inheritance tax on whatever you receive. So you're going to get the property, but in addition, you have to pay the tax, which means you may have to sell it, depending on how much that tax is. So that's something that you should be aware of, even though we live in a state that we don't have that tax. And the other thing is, if you own property in any of these states, especially let's look at Massachusetts is one of the most progressive high estate tax rates. So if you own real property, if you have a vacation home, let's say up there in Boston, and you are using that, it's your family vacation home, and you're going to pass that down to your children will have to pay state taxes on that in the state of Massachusetts. So that's something that if you have that issue, that you should really consult with an estate planning attorney and see how you can protect that. There's different ways. It depends on the state. It's all very nuanced to whatever the laws are in that state, but you can put it in a trust, you can put it in an LLC. It just depends on the state and the laws that they have. So that's definitely just something I want to bring up, because a lot of people don't realize that. And then the other thing is, if you are a Texas resident and you die in Texas and you have a Texas estate, you'll do a probate in Texas, and you'll do a probate in whatever state that you own that property in. So you will have more than one probate, which is another reason to look at getting some sort of a trust or something set up so that you can avoid having 2 probates or more, depending on what property you own and where it is, where it's located. So I just wanted to mention that, because it's, like I said, it's something that a lot of people don't realize, that there's other laws, and just because we live in Texas and we don't have the state taxes, other states do, and they will apply to you if you have anything in those states. So it's just a little side note before we go to Biden's proposals. So these have not been released yet, the estate and gift tax. This is what he has said when he's been campaigning, and kind of like what most experts are saying most likely are going to happen. It's what he's discussed. So, you know, we've got the 40% rate right now, and he's playing around with maybe lifting that up to 45%. That isn't a firm number, so it's just kind of a guess. He's gonna, that one's not as firm as the other. This is more of what he's been talking about and has said repeatedly as he was campaigning for president, that he wanted to lower it to $3.5 million for the exemption amount. So, you know, instead of in 2025, when everything drops back down to the 5 million adjusted for inflation, he wants to kind of circumvent that. And now, maybe the end of this year, maybe early next year, not sure. He's talking about dropping it down to 3.5 million. So that's 7 million per couple. And you still get the portability. He's not suggesting anything with that, but he's suggesting separating the estate tax from the gift tax and making those two separate things and capping that at $1 million. So I'm not sure exactly how that all plays in. If you're still a total of 3.5 lifetime, that hasn't been clarified. So we may be just looking at 3.5 total, but you could only gift $1 million of it while you're alive, and the rest of it has to go after you've passed. It's kind of what we're assuming, but not for sure, since he hasn't outlined that yet. And then the other thing he had mentioned, and this is totally also just guessing, is possibly ending that annual exclusion gifting that I talked about, that you can gift to, you know, unlimited people at $15,000 per year per person. He mentioned it, but I don't know, we haven't seen this, but this is possible. So these are possible things that could come out. And then one other thing I've seen mentioned too, is, like I said, implementing it now, and maybe even making it retroactive for the year. So if it came in at the end of this year, he had talked about making it retroactive for the whole year. I don't know how that would work, or if it would even fly. My guess is that would be a hard sell for Congress and pretty messy for anyone who's already done their estate tax return for the year, and you know, you don't want to have to go back and redo all that. That would be a lot of work. So I think the most out of all of these, on the most likely is that 3.5 million. It's really what he's been talking about, and not just him, but other members of Congress. So there's a lot of support for that in Congress, and the rest of it is more of a guess. So really, the main concern at this point is if we're going to drop back to that 3.5 million, there's a lot of estates out there. There's a lot of people that have that amount in your business, your 401k, your house. You have to start adding up everything you have. And a lot of people are going to hit that amount. So I'm not sure if our goal is to, with this estate tax the wealthy, if that's what we're really doing. Because if most people that are, I wouldn't say middle class, but upper middle class to somewhat, you know, more wealthy, like that's the border. And so you're starting to tax people that probably are not considered wealthy anymore. And it would really hurt their families when we pass on the estates, when they pass away. Now this actually was released this morning. So I just updated my slide because I had some of this on here. So this is the American Families Plan. I don't know if anybody has looked at it, but it talked about, I think it was $1.8 billion of funding. I did not write that down. That he's looking to try and get for a whole bunch of programs that he wants to fund. And the way he wants to do it is primarily by that second, or the capital gains rate, by increasing that to $39.6 million. So what does that mean? That means that what he wants to do is right now is our income tax rate, the highest rate is 37%. He wants to bump that up to 39.6% and then tax anyone who makes over $400,000 a year. I'm not sure if that's a couple or single. That was kind of unclear in the release, but anyone who makes that amount would be taxed at that higher amount. And then if you made $1 million in 1 year, the capital gains tax would be that 39.6%, like ordinary income instead of the regular preferred capital gains tax rate. So what does that mean? That means, let's say you are a business owner and you have a business that's worth just slightly over $1 million and you sell it. You've made $1 million. Maybe you only make $80,000 to $100,000 a year in income, but you go to sell that business. Now you've got to pay almost 40% in taxes. There's also, I didn't see this in the release, but he's mentioned this 3.8% surtax. So that might play in, ends up being just over 43%. So it's a lot to be paying out in taxes compared to what we have now with the preferred rate. So that could be a pretty serious result. So if you're looking at selling a business in the next few years, of course, everyone at Exit Advisors can help you look at that and see what would be the best way to do it. But if we end up having this capital gains increase, that's going to be very interesting, I think, to see what happens for that. The other thing, and this is mentioned in his American Families Plan release, is elimination of the step up in basis. Now, this is an estate planning tool, really, and that's why I listed it here, and he kind of specified it. But for those of you unfamiliar with it, step up in basis means when you pass away, your estate steps up to the fair market value. So even if, let's say you purchased a house 10 years ago, it was worth 500,000, your house is 750,000 when you die, it's now worth 750,000 in the new fair market value for your heirs. So that's what step up in basis does. It's very easy to do when people pass away. You don't have to go back and value their estate and find out what the basis was when they purchased it. A lot of times, if that property has been in the family for years, no one really knows. So it gets to be tricky for that kind of thing. They actually, in 1976, Congress had tried, they actually passed the law to eliminate step up in basis upon death. And they passed it so that you have a carryover basis, which is where you take whatever basis the person had when they owned it. And they found it was way too difficult to even implement. So they stopped it because they couldn't figure out how to find out the valuations from all the businesses and all of the properties and all of the, from way back. And so now, we have computers and such, so it might be easier, but I think it's still going to be an issue. Plus, the IRS has to be able to have the tools to handle these coming through, because right now they don't have to worry about trying to determine, is that basis an accurate amount? And so part of his funding, or the money that he's raising in this American Families Plan, is supposed to go to help the IRS beef up their, I guess their forces to try and figure these things out. But it's still going to be, I think, an uphill battle, because it's going to be just really hard to get those numbers, to be able to track that, and then have to go back and have probably, audits done on some of these just to see if the valuations are right. It's going to be much more complicated than I think most people want to try and do for their taxes when someone dies. So the other thing is, he released some numbers. And so his step up in basis starts at $1 million for one person, 2.5 per couple. So I think that is more when they're alive. If you're selling some property, the step up in basis goes away if you're a couple. But when somebody dies, you're going to be looking at that million because you're going to be a single person. And then another addition that he put on was if the property is a business or a farm, there's no tax so long as whoever gets it, like the next generation, continues operations. So, I mean, I guess that's good provision to have in there. Probably need more clarification on what that means, though. Continue operations for how long, and how that becomes a qualifying factor to having not having to pay the taxes. So next, I'm going to show you a couple of things that Congress has been doing. So Elizabeth Warren introduced in March of this year this Ultra Millionaire Tax Act. And so I'm going to guess that most people here don't have $50 million or more in assets, but this still is something to know about and be aware of, because it's not a transfer tax. It's like the estate tax. It's not an income tax. It's a tax on your accumulated assets that you just have. So her policy, or proposed policy, is 2% on households and trusts with a net worth of $50 million or more, and then the 3% if it's $1 billion or more. So it's kind of an arbitrary number. If anybody has followed any of the presidential campaigns in the last couple of years, her plan isn't the only one out there. So Bernie Sanders has a plan. His is slightly different, but his has not been introduced as a bill like Elizabeth Warren's. But I just wanted to point that out, that there's more taxing, and this also runs into a lot of the same issues as the step up in basis. Like, how do you value someone's net worth? If it's all business owned and there's no cash assets, how do you pay 2% tax? How do you determine that every year? Who's going out there and monitoring this? And can the IRS actually do that? And they right now cannot. They've actually admitted they absolutely cannot. So her plan also beefs up the IRS, but are we doing the chicken or the egg here? Because how are we going to have the money to fund it that's coming in from this plan to pay for what's supposed to be monitoring this plan? So it's kind of risky. Plus, I'm not sure that all of the Democrats are going to be on board with this type of plan. It's way more progressive than any of the other ones out there. And, there's just a lot of issues with it. So the odds that this passes, I think, are pretty slim, but something can come down, negotiated down to be a little bit less, or, you just never know what you're going to see in a bill. The other thing is, opposite side of this is also in March, McConnell and Representative Thune, they introduced a bill to just completely repeal the death tax. So completely opposite of everything we've heard. But again, right now, the Republicans are not in control, and the odds that that bill passes are even less. So just wanted to kind of share what the current legislation is out there that's possible. The Biden administration obviously is pushing more and will have more teeth than any of these types of plans. And so really that's the one that we really want to focus on. So what impact do these plans have on you? So if you are looking at the current tax law with $11.7 million that you can pass estate tax free, you might be thinking, nothing, I have no worries. But if we drop down to, let's say, even the almost 6 million, sometimes that's close, that's pretty close. And it's not just what your assets are today, but if you're in your 50s and your 60s, what are your assets going to be worth 20, 30 years from now? You've got to account for inflation too. And then A lot of times people don't add up all of the things that will be included in your taxable estate, like your business. How's that going to be valued if you own a business? Life insurance, that's part of your estate. And sometimes people have a couple $1 million in life insurance, and that just doesn't get thought of. And if you own property in other countries, that if you're a US citizen or a US resident, all of your worldwide assets are included. So I know in Houston, we have a lot of people that have moved here from other countries, to work for various companies here. And so they have not only assets here in the US, but assets back in their home country, wherever that is. So all of it is included in your taxable estate. So of course, if it drops down to 3.5 million, I think there's going to be a lot of people that are in that taxable boat. And you probably want to have your estate plan looked at, or at least think about trying to figure out if there's something that you could do now to reduce that impact on you. And I've got a couple of examples on how this could happen and what you can see. So this is really typical of what I see is a non-taxable estate, but now we're looking at with the Biden changes in the step up in basis and the capital gains that we just looked at that he proposed today. So mom and dad have both passed away. So we're looking at probably mom was the last one to pass away, and this is her probate. And the main asset is this house that they bought 30 years ago. They lived there, bought it for $250,000, really nice house. They probably have some other assets, maybe some a retirement plan like an IRA, or maybe a small insurance policy. But really the biggest thing that they own is this house, and that's what's going to be split amongst say the 3 kids. And now the house is worth $1.3 million. So we don't get that step up in basis because this is over $1 million, and it was mom's when she died, so it's one person. And so when we look at the value of the house, we're over $1 million. So now we're not going to get the step up, and we're going to have to pay that 39.6%, maybe even the 43-ish%. But I calculated it was 39.6%, and you had say 3 kids, and everybody's got their own house. They don't want to keep mom's house. They're just going to sell it. They're going to have to pay over $400,000 in taxes and capital gains taxes. That's not. This is a non-taxable estate. And normally you would get that step up to that 1.3 million and just sell it and split, the proceeds and not have to worry about it. But if his proposals that he released this morning go through, then you're looking at quite a big impact on just a regular, a non-taxable estate. You're going to have capital gains, and depending on what else is in the estate, maybe more than what I just calculated there. So that's an example, like I said, of a non-taxable estate. And then this is a little more complicated. If we have a family-owned business, say it was owned for 40 years, this is typical. It could be a farm, it could be a ranch, it could be a business, construction, whatever. And, a lot of times business owners, what do? They fully depreciate all their assets because that's the biggest tax break out there. So we fully depreciated everything that we can. Dad was the sole owner. He passes away, and now he's going to leave everything behind. And that was a little bit complicated, but you can see what could happen. And this is tracking with Biden's proposed laws. So the current tax laws, if it's a $30 million, this is just a number to use, right? $30 million business. Right now, there's no capital gains, 0%. Under Biden, we would have to pay that 39.6 plus the 3.8, so 43.4% capital gains tax owed. Right there, it's over $13 million. Then we're going to move down to the estate tax portion. So if it was, someone who did some actual planning, they did the portability, they got the $23.4 million estate tax exemption, then they've got only 6.6 million of a taxable estate at 40%, and they've got 2.6 essentially $million, and that's 8.8% of the estate. Where if you look at if the estate taxes drop down to 7, now we've already paid over 13 million in capital gains, and then we're going to pay almost 10 million in estate taxes for a total of 17,511,000, and that's an outstanding amount of over 58% paid out in taxes. And that's just an example of what could happen if all of his laws come through that he's proposed. So as you can see, it's a huge difference. It's over 50, about 50% of the estate versus 8. So, or actually about 60% versus 8. So it's a big increase and a big impact with the capital gains and the estate taxes that can be all, piled onto one estate if you're in the right, estate or values with the estate tax and capital gains tax. So what can I do to protect my assets? Let's say if you are don't have an estate plan now, go get one. You can use irrevocable trusts to protect assets, to get assets out of your estate. There's other advanced planning for businesses. There's creative gifting, like I mentioned. There's charitable gifting. There's all sorts of things that you can do. So you really need to go and talk to somebody to see what maybe your unique situation would need to just, make sure that you're not going to lose half of your estate to taxes if, these new tax laws pass. So anyway, that is the conclusion I have for my presentation today. And turn it back over to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Heidi. Yeah, what a awakening this is, and needless to say, very, very hyper aggressive tax policies that could come into effect. I guess one of the first questions is, these are being proposed. How likely do we think these will actually be to getting passed, even with kind of the control now of Congress, in the hands of the Democrats? This is going to probably upset a lot of folks. So, how likely, just in your personal opinion, do you think it is that these will pass, as they are on paper today, or do you think it's more likely we'll meet somewhere in the middle? Just what are your thoughts there? And Al, Gary, chime in if you have.
They might have better opinions than me. I don't know, but I think it's possible some of it's going to pass, but I don't know that all of it will pass. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, since how Congress and the Senate are both Democratic, and of course our president as well, and some of the things that have already been passed, I am concerned. I'm concerned for, I look at this wealth tax, and that will be a monster to compute, and that will be a monster from a standpoint of disclosure. How are you going to be able to get, what type of return is going to have to be compiled to come up with somebody's total assets? That will be somewhat horrendous. I just almost see an issue with that computation. And I don't know if you talked about them doing away with the lack of control and lack of marketability discount too.
I did not. That's a very good point.
So that's something, when you start valuing your assets, going to a family limited partnership or what have you, if they do away with that, that could increase value by 50%, going against a lifetime exemption. And if they bring the lifetime exemption down to 3.5 million, there's going to have to be some scrambling on estate planning. And, like you said, and Al can chime in, I mean, this could be a certainly time. I mean, Al always talks about, are you ready? If you got hit by a bus, well, a lot of people
Yeah.
right now ought to feel like they should be ready if they got hit by a bus, because, realistically, 2021 could be a year. If you're postured to sell your business, you may want to start doing it. I mean, it may be time. What do you think, Al?
Yeah, I agree, Gary, how to answer your question. I mean, there's really nothing standing in the way. I think what, we've heard and what I heard, what seems to make common sense is a lot of the stuff may be phased in, but I think we're definitely going to see it. And I think we always point to, trying to tax the rich and the rich and the rich. But like you said, you sell a business and if you're a business owner and your net worth is tied up in your business primarily, and that's going to be your retirement and your estate, then it doesn't take a lot to be considered rich, right?
Exactly.
So, that 43% is a huge number. And I just think it's going to catch a lot of people by surprise, because there's not a whole lot you can do at the end of the road. There just isn't, and like you said, if you have these built-in gains from assets that are depreciated, and most small business sales are asset sales, you're going to pay tax on that, capital gains on the earnings. And I don't see a whole lot right now that's going to stop that, moving that way. Right. So it will take a lot of planning. And I think that's the key to all this, is capturing this, ahead of time, is setting up family limited partnerships, trust, stuff like that. And really looking at this strategically with a good long-term plan, because it's just not anything you can really do at the end.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, Heidi, let me ask you a question. Are people protected right now that, you got the lifetime exemption, but what, 11,400,000 or 11,600,000, whatever it is. I know it's inflation adjusted,
Mhm.
but are you protected in 2021? Let's say that they lower it to 3.5 million and you move all your assets in 2021. That's the law now. So they can't go back and say, oh, well, it's 3.5. So you move these assets in 2021. Now, they're going to be taxed.
So Biden mentioned it on his campaign. I haven't seen it in any of his proposals, but he mentioned making it retroactive. But I think that would be challenged constitutionally, to make something retroactive like that, especially if sales have been done, if businesses have been sold, estates have been settled. It'd be a nightmare to go back retroactively.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, in my opinion, it's probably going to be safe up until the end of this year. But I don't know about if they pass it right at the end of the year. If he starts talking about it more, and there's going to be a scramble. I don't know if you guys were around in 2010. As far as like watching the estate tax, when I worked at a law firm, there was a scramble to get assets protected. Maybe you guys worked on that too, because there was no estate tax that year. We didn't know what was going to happen. Do you remember that, Al?
Oh yeah, there was a big scramble. It's crazy. Everyone moved, and some people missed the window too, which
Yes, they did.
changed everything. Gary, what's the lowest you remember being estate tax? $600,000?
I think it was $600,000, and that was back in like 2001.
Yeah.
I think it was. That was.
Yeah, it was 19. I had a slide earlier. It was 1999, 2000. It was $650,000.
That was the lowest, right? Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
But I still see plans these days that are planned around that. So that's really scary.
Gary, you mentioned elimination of the discounts for lack of marketability and lack of control. And equity compensation is something that catches people by surprise too.
Ooh,
If you're given equity compensation in a startup or in a company, that's taxable, and it has to be valued. And we can traditionally use these discounts, which we can really lower it, but that could be something that's substantial as well. Right.
But it's funny. I just did some analysis for a client on ISOs and non-statutory stock options, and if the company gives you the ability to exercise the date you get the option, then you can do so. There's very much margin that you would have to claim as income, and you file an 83B and put that on your tax return, and now all of a sudden you're safe from the rally of the stock. Well, that could come into play. But then even if you get stock options, and let's say it's restricted companies, and let's say that you got lack of control and lack of marketability, and the value could be perceived as $100,000, but without those controls, it's maybe $10,000.
Right.
But they do away with that, then all of a sudden you got to put $100,000 on your tax return.
Yeah. Gary, I know you face it. I can't tell you the number of people that come to me and say, well, I got equity compensation last year. I said, well, did you pay taxes on it? And they say, no. So, it's, did you get it valued? No. It's just like, are you kidding me, right? And I guess that's all subject then to penalties and interest, right? If they come back and do it retroactively. So.
Yeah, they really never tried to attack that so much, but that could be, the IRS does things like they set up an initiative. So, nothing would prevent them from saying, okay, we're going to go after all these people who we believe have received compensation through equity. And then they do that. They go out after it. And, it's just like they did with reasonable compensation. They set up an initiative, They set up a division, and they went after it, man. If you weren't claiming officer compensation on your 1120S, you were going to get a knock on the door. So.
Yeah, hi, we have a few questions, but real quick, will you back up to your first example, that first scenario, the state tax?
Yeah.
This is a question that I have. So let's say that you go through this scenario, you have to come up with $415,000 of cash to pay for the estate. You inevitably end up selling the house anyways. Do you have to pay taxes to sell when you sell the house to pay then that estate tax as well?
No, not this one's just capital gains, because if this was taxable, you'd be paying both, right? You would have to pay capital gains and
You have
estate.
to pay the taxes when you sell it so that you can pay the tax.
Yeah, so what's funny is people say that the estate tax is a double tax with the income tax. Well, now it's going to be a triple tax.
Triple.
Let's be real, because you're going to have income tax that you've already paid, and then you can have, when you sell it, you're going to have that extra capital gains. It's like huge. It's not the benefit of capital gains, and then you're going to have estate taxes. It's massive.
So David had a question, and it kind of overlaps with some of the other questions we had about, is there an estate plan or an estate plan strategy that's robust enough to handle all these uncertainties? And that kind of ties into the initial question I had is there anything that families can do prior to this 2025 deadline, if it's not even made retroactive, to start sheltering and kind of lock in where they are now prior to having something, effectively cut more than in half or even into a third?
Right. There's so irrevocable trust, there's all different types depending on your situation that you can put assets in that takes it out of your estate and use your lifetime, part of your lifetime gifting, and then it can grow estate tax free. So you can do that. You can do maybe some of the different valuations and get discounts on it right now. We have those, and maybe like Gary suggested, like a family limited partnership, or do that kind of planning. That's another thing you can do with your business. But if you're going to sell your business, there's extra, it's just going to be a lot of extra planning to get all that in. Don't you think, Gary? Like, you'd have to start now if you were going to sell your business in the next few years.
Yeah, that's something you and I were talking about earlier today, kind of the same premise, but not so much for a house or your estate. But let's say you're selling your business, you pay the applicable taxes and capital gains on the business, and that's an entirely different conversation. We've talked about it before. We'll talk about it again. So set that aside, but you've sold your business out, you paid the taxes on that, but how do you protect that
Mhm.
lump sum that's now part of your estate that you're going to end up paying taxes on, or your family's going to pay taxes on upon your death?
Right. So if you look at this example, and you look at the first, if you sell your business and it sells for what it sells for, right? Even if you've done some sort of discount valuations or whatever you've maybe done, but you're going to have to pay capital gains on that. But then the next step, when you're looking at the estate taxes, that's where, if you have enough time, you can go in there and you can shelter that in some sort of an irrevocable trust and put that money aside. There's just so many, it's kind of hard to get into them all, but there's just a lot of different things you can do, and it depends on the situation. So it can be avoided. The estate tax could be avoided, possibly. It'll be a unique situation for each person. But if you're really worried about it, it's something you should look at, I would say now.
It's pretty terrifying to think that even after that, when you pay 58%, then all of a sudden
Yeah.
there's got to be something in the middle. And hopefully that's what my first question, 8% seems a little generous. 58% is just punitive.
Oh, it's ridiculous. I mean,
I can't imagine that many people are going to, Democrat or Republican, are going to be very thrilled.
right. Like you asked how you think the odds would be if it passed. We've got I think you need 3 Democrats to side with the Republicans to pass something Republican based, or to block something Democrat, either side, either way. That's what I've heard. The numbers that's how close we are. And I think most Republicans are going to stand firm against the Democrats, but if nobody switches over or, decides, hey, wait, maybe the people that voted me in are going to hate me if I vote for these tax increases, then we might get stuck with some of them. It's very possible. It's kind of scary. This is scary.
Again, Heidi, like we talked about earlier, you look at these big numbers and stuff, and I mean, this is the 1%, the 2%, right? And people really don't have a lot of sympathy, and that's typically where the sites are aimed at, right? On all this. But this is worked an entire life to build up the business and get to this point, and then they sell it and they realize it. Another thing when you talk about long-term strategy, and Gary and I have been through this, very few people realize this, and we actually had a client that thought that along the way he checked the wrong box because he was an LLC treated as a C Corp. But when he got to the end of the road and sold his business, he was able to take advantage of the 1202 election, which is zero capital gains, or 50% if it's below, I think, before 2010 or 2012. So it's amazing when you get to the end of the road, you see this, and on one side, we're kind of like a doctor sometimes. Someone comes in and says, man, your tests are horrible. You got high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and it's tough. Another one comes in and says, look, you're not paying any tax on this, or 50% of capital gains because you chose a C election. So these parts of the strategy are just critical.
Yeah.
All the way along.
Right. For the 1202, you have to own it for like 5 years, right? Before you can get that. And
if you own it for 5 years, if you own it for 5 years, it's originally issued stock. It's not, there's zero capital gains.
Right.
So
but it has to be issued as corporate stock. It can't be an LLC that converts.
It can't be an LLC. It has to be C Corp.
Yeah.
So it's interesting now with corporate rates at 21%, right? Kind of makes sense, especially if you're going to take deductions and kind of pay your expenses down and stuff. There's a lot of strategy you can do, but you've just got to understand the long-term strategy and where you fit and what's the best route. And these things can't be done retroactively. That's the challenge.
Definitely not. It's definitely proactive especially now. I think we've had a kind of a little lull in planning where everything was just kind of nice and nobody thought about it. Now, kind of got to wake up and figure it out.
We haven't even, we know it's coming. We know it's coming down the pipe, but we haven't even touched corporate tax rates yet and what that's going to do and how that's going to affect business valuations and M&A in the next few years. So, I mean, everyone there, you awake? This is getting kind of scary. So
I think they're definitely going to increase corporate tax rates. I mean,
No
that's
doubt. No doubt.
That's a slam dunk. I mean, they're talking about 28%.
Right.
That'll certainly hurt our, I mean, it's interesting. We do a lot of analysis where, people from foreign countries are putting C corporations in the United States, to build business here. And we went through this period with a 21% tax rate where it was more beneficial to keep the money in the country, right? Instead of taking it out and flushing it, back home where the tax rates are less. They put these tax rates back up and, our tax rate will be higher than some of these other countries. So they're just going to take the money out of the country. So it's interesting on how some of these things, people don't understand the economic impact that they can have.
the unintended consequences, yeah.
Yeah, taxes, and a lot of people, you hear the term EBITDA. Businesses are valued on free cash flow, and tax expense is just like any other expense. So if you have an 8% increase in taxes, it's like an 8% increase in labor or anything else from a valuation standpoint. And when the tax rates got cut from 35 to 21%, we saw this 14% increase, increase in cash flow. And the valuation of these businesses went up because their tax expense went down. And now the opposite, if tax rates go up, the value is going to go down because it impacts cash flow. And it's a lot of people still realize that.
It's going to be a lot of fallout that I think we're not even thinking about. This is probably pretty simplified, actually, even though it looks complicated, what I have up here. It's not the whole story. So yeah, you're right.
Well, we're over the hour, so we'll let everyone go. But Heidi, thank you so much. This was
Thank you.
informative and a wake up call. And this is what we do. This is when you need to start reaching out and start planning ahead. Reach out to us, to help develop your exit strategy for your business, and to Heidi for your estate.
Yep.
And we'll have more to come as well.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thanks so much for having me today. This was very fun, interesting conversation.
Thank you, Heidi.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.